It was a chilly fall evening, and I was walking home from school. As I turned down a dark alley, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see a tall, slender figure following me. I quickened my pace, and he matched it effortlessly. Fear coursed through my veins as I realized that I was being followed by a stranger. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, but when I turned onto my street and saw him behind me, I knew something was wrong. I picked up my pace, but he was gaining on me. I could hear his heavy breathing and the sound of his boots hitting the pavement. Panic set in, and I ran as fast as I could. I reached my house and frantically fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door. Just as I finally got it open and rushed inside, I felt a sharp pain in my back. I turned to see the man standing behind me, a knife in his hand and a sinister grin on his face. I screamed and ran upstairs to my room, locking the door behind me. I could hear him pounding on the door, his voice echoing through the house. "I know you're in there, little one. There is no escape for you now." Tears streamed down my face as I searched for my phone, but it was nowhere to be found. I was trapped, and there was no one to help me. Suddenly, the pounding stopped, and all was quiet. I cautiously picked out my window and saw the man walking away, his knife glinting in the moonlight. I let out a sigh of relief, but my heart was still racing. I knew he would be back, and I had to find a way to escape. I sat in my room, shaking in fear, until the early hours of the morning. Finally, I mustered up the courage to leave and call the police. They arrived quickly and searched the area, but there was no sign of the man. They reassured me that they would keep an eye out of him and advised me to stay with a friend or family member for the night. I stayed with my best friend, Catherine, and told her everything that had happened. She was terrified for me and insisted on staying by my side at all times. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the man was still out there, watching and waiting for his next opportunity to strike. The next day, I received a call from the police. They had found the man, and he had confessed to multiple murders. I was relieved and grateful that he was caught, but I couldn't shake off the haunting memories of that night. Weeks went by, and life went back to normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man and the horrors he had inflicted on innocent people. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, waiting for his next victim. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to me, and it sent shivers down my spine. It was from the man, the serial killer. He claimed that he escaped from prison and was coming for me. He knew where I lived, and he was going to finish what he started. I immediately called the police, but they couldn't find any evidence of his escape. They assured me that it was just a sick prank, but I knew better. The man was out there, and he was coming for me. I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder and checking every corner for any sign of the man. But no matter how careful I was, he always seemed to be one step ahead. One night, I woke up to find the man standing at the foot of my bed. His dark eyes bored into mine as he whispered, "It's time for you to pay for what you did." I screamed and ran out of my room, but he was gone. I called the police again, but they found no signs of a break-in. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, but then I received another letter. It was from the man, and it contained a chilling message. "I'm always watching," it read. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and left town, hoping to escape the man's grasp. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for his next chance to strike. I couldn't live in fear forever, so I decided to confront the man. I went back to my hometown and searched for any leads on his whereabouts. After weeks of searching, I finally found him in hiding in an abandoned building. I cautiously entered the building, my heart pounding in my chest. As I made my way through the dark corridors, I could feel his presence getting stronger and stronger. Finally, I reached a room with a flickering light. I stepped inside, and there he was, sitting in the corner with a twisted smile on his face. "You can't escape me," he said, his voice filled with malice. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had to face my fears and found the courage to stand up to him. I called the police and watched as they took him away, knowing that I was finally free from his grasp. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. I never imagined that my life would end up like this. I never thought that I would be living in constant fear, looking over my shoulder every second of the day. But that's what happens when you cross paths with a serial killer. It all started one night when I was walking home from a late shift at work. The streets were quiet and empty, the only sound being my own footsteps echoing through the dark alleyways. I had always been a little nervous walking alone at night, but I never thought anything would actually happen to me. But then I saw him. He was standing under the flickering streetlight, his tall, lanky frame sending shivers down my spine. He was wearing a dark hooded jacket that covered most of his face, but I could see a sinister smile playing on his lips. I quickened my pace, hoping to just walk past him and get home safely. But as I got closer, I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. My heart raced as I realized that I was in danger. I tried to turn and run, but it was too late. He grabbed me from behind and covered my mouth with his hand. I could smell the stench of alcohol and sweat on his skin. "Shh, don't scream," he whispered in my ear. "It'll be over soon." I struggled and fought against him, but he was too strong. He dragged me into the nearby alley and pushed me against the wall. But I could feel the cold brick against my skin and sharp edge of the knife pressed against my neck. "Please, don't hurt me," I begged, tears streaming down my face. He just laughed and tightened his grip on me. "You should have thought about that before you crossed me," he sneered. I closed my eyes and prepared for the worst. But then I heard a loud noise and the grip on me loosened. I opened my eyes to see a group of people running towards us, drawn by my screams. The killer took advantage of the commotion and disappeared into the night. I was shaken and traumatized by the encounter, but I was alive. However, that was just the beginning. For the next few weeks, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was just being watched. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see the killer's face leering at me. I started having nightmares of panic attacks, and I couldn't even leave my house without a feeling that I was being followed. Then, the news broke. The series of brutal murders have occurred in our city, all with the same modus operandi. The victims were all young women, attacked in the dark alleyways or deserted streets. The killer was still large, and the police were no closer to catching him. I couldn't believe it. The man who had attacked me was now a wanted serial killer? I was terrified, but I also felt a sense of guilt. Maybe if I had been more able to identify him, these women would have been still alive. As the days went by, the fear and guilt consumed me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on anything else but the serial killer. I became obsessed with finding him, with bringing him to justice. I started researching serial killers and their patterns, trying to understand his motives and how to catch him. But then, one night, I received a package at my doorstep. It was a letter, written in a disturbingly neat handwriting. It read, "Dear Alex, I know you've been looking for me. I've been watching your every move. You're not like the others. You're a fighter. I like that. I want to play a game with you. But if you can't, well, let's just say you don't want to know the consequences. Let the hunt begin." My hands were shaking as I read the letter. I couldn't believe that the killer was toying with me, that he wanted me to find him. But I couldn't let him continue killing innocent women. I had to do something. With the help of a friend, I started looking for any clues that could lead us to the killer. I searched through the city, asking for people if they have seen anyone suspicious, but we came out empty-handed. It was like he had disappeared into the thin air. But then I received another letter. This time, it included a map with a location marked on it. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I had to take the risk. I went to the warehouse alone, armed with a small pocket knife. I searched every corner, every room, but I could find nothing. But just as I was about to give up, I heard a creaking sound behind me. I turned around to see the killer standing in the doorway, his hood still covering his face. "You found me," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. I was about to run, but then I saw something that made me freeze in fear. On the walls were the warehouse. There were pictures of all the women he had killed, including me. I realized then he was been watching me for a long time, planning and waiting for the next moment to strike. He lunged at me with his knife, and I barely managed to dodge it. We fought, both of us desperate to survive. But in the end, he was stronger and more skilled. He overpowered me and pinned me to the ground, the knife pressed against my throat. "You lose," he whispered, his breath hot in my face. But then I saw a glimmer of light from the corner of my eye. It was a police officer, drawn by the commotion. He shouted for the killer to drop the knife, and in that moment of distraction, I managed to grab my own knife and stab him in the arm. He let out a scream of pain and dropped the knife, and the police officer was able to arrest him. I was safe, but the nightmare was far from over. The trial was long and painful, having to relive the trauma over and over again. But in the end, the killer was sentenced to life in prison. I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that he could never hurt anyone else. I never thought I would become the target of a serial killer. I was just a regular 13-year-old girl, living in a small town with my parents and an older brother. But everything changed when the news broke out about a serial killer on the loose in our town. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I mean, serial killers were just something you saw in movies or read about it in books. They didn't actually exist in real life, right? But as the murder of victims grew, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The killer had a specific target: teenage girls. And I fit the profile perfectly. It all started when I received a strange letter in the mail. It was handwritten, and the words were slanted and jagged, as if the person writing it was in a hurry. The letter read, "You're next. Watch your back." I immediately showed it to my parents, who brushed it off as a prank. But Deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The next day, I received another letter. This time, it was accompanied by a photo of me walking to school. I was horrified. How did this person get a photo of me? Why were they targeting me? I tried to tell my parents again, but they just thought I was overreacting. They assured me that everything would be fine and I shouldn't worry about it. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Everywhere that I go, I felt like someone was following me. I started seeing the same car parked outside my house every day with the man sitting inside, staring at me. I tried to tell my parents, but they just brushed it off as paranoia. They didn't understand the fear that was consuming me. One night, I was getting ready for bed. I heard a noise coming from my closet. I froze, my heart racing. I slowly walked towards the closet and opened the door. To my horror, I saw a mask staring back at me. It was a clown mask with a sinister grin and dark, empty eyes. I screamed and ran out of my room, waking up my parents in the process. They searched my room and found no one. They chalked it up to my overactive imagination, but I knew what I saw. The next day, I found a note on my bed, written in the same jagged handwriting as the previous letters. It read, "I see you. I'm coming for you." I knew I had to do something before it was too late. I started to do my own research and found out that the serial killer was targeting girls with long, dark hair. I fit the description perfectly. I also found out that the victims were all found with their throats slit with a clown mask placed on their face. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The killer was after me, and he was getting closer. I tried to tell my parents again, but they still didn't believe me. They thought I was trying to get attention. I felt completely alone and scared for my life. I started skipping school, afraid to leave to the safety of my home. But the killer seemed to know my every move. He would leave notes and objects in my room, reminding me that he was watching me. One day, I received a note telling me to go to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was signed by the killer, and he had promised to leave me alone if I showed up. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I couldn't keep living in constant fear. I had to face him. I snuck out of my house and made my way to the warehouse. As soon as I entered, I heard a voice behind me. "I've been waiting for you." I turned around to see a man wearing a clown mask, holding a knife. I froze, unable to move or speak. He slowly approached me, the knife glinting in the dim light. "You're going to be my next victim," he said with a sinister grin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He lunged towards me, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But suddenly, I heard a loud bang, followed by a thud. I opened my eyes to see the killer lie on the ground, a gunshot wound in his chest. Standing behind him was a police officer, gun at ready. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping me up. I couldn't believe it. The nightmare was finally over. The killer was taken into custody and I was safe. It turned out that the police had been tracking him for months, but they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest until now. As I sat in the police station, giving my statement, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to be alive. I also couldn't help but wonder, what if my parents had believed me sooner? Would I have been spared from all this terror? But I pushed those thoughts away, grateful to be alive and safe. From that day on, I never took my safety for granted. I learned to trust my instincts, and it's to speak up when something didn't feel right. And I made sure I always keep my loved ones close, knowing that they were my biggest protectors. The experience may have left me scared, but it also made me stronger. I survived the terror of a serial killer, and that was something I will never forget. As I walked home from school, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It was a familiar sensation, one that had been haunting me for the past few weeks. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the unease that was creeping up my spine. But as I turned the corner onto my street, I saw a figure standing at the end of my driveway. It was a man, tall and menacing, with a dark hood covering his face. My heart raced as I fumbled for my keys, struggling to unlock the door. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, and I could feel his eyes burning into my back. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. But then I heard a knock on the door. My blood ran cold as I slowly turned around. The man now was standing on my porch, still wearing his dark hood. I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. He knocked again, but this time his voice echoed through the door. "Let me in, Sarah. I just want to talk." How did he know my name? I thought, panic rising in my chest. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I had to call the police. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't in my pocket. I must have left it in my locker at school. I cursed myself for being so careless. The man's voice grew more urgent. "Come on, Sarah. Open the door. I wouldn't hurt you." But I knew better. I heard about the string of murders that had been happening in our town. Young girls, just like me, that had just been disappearing without a trace. And now, this man was at my doorstep, claiming that he just wanted to talk. I knew he was a serial killer that everyone was talking about. I could feel my legs trembling as I backed away from the door. I had to find a way to escape. I ran to the back door, but it was locked. I was trapped. The voice grew angry. "Open the door, Sarah. I won't ask again." I could hear the sound of the doorknob being twisted violently. He was trying to break in. Adrenaline surged through my body as I desperately looked for a way out. Then I remembered the small window in the basement. It was my only chance. I ran down the stairs and threw open the basement door. But before I could reach the window, the man grabbed me from behind and covered my mouth with his hand. I struggled and kicked, trying to break free, but he was too strong. He dragged me to the corner of the room and pushed me against the wall. I could feel the cold cement against my back as he towered over me, his knife gleaming in the dim light. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to choke out. The man chuckled darkly. "Because I can, Sarah. And because you're just like all the others, weak and helpless." I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I realized that was it. That was how I was going to die. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then, I heard a loud bang, and the man collapsed onto the floor. I opened my eyes to see my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, standing in the doorway with a shotgun in his hands. "Are you all right, Sarah?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Johnson called the police, and they arrived within minutes. The man was arrested, and I was taken to the hospital to be checked for any injuries. It was a terrifying experience, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. But as the days passed, the nightmares became more real. I could still feel the man's hands on me, his breath on my neck. I couldn't sleep, afraid that he would just come back for me. And then I started seeing him everywhere, in the shadows, in the reflection of mirrors, even in my own room. I knew it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still out there, watching me. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the man who had tried to kill me. In the letter, he described in detail how he had been watching me for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He talked about how he'd been following me, learning my routines, and how he carefully planned for every step of the attack. And then, he revealed the most chilling detail of it all. He was still out there, waiting for another opportunity to finish what he started. I was terrified. How could he have known all of this? How could he have been watching me without even me realizing it? I went to the police, but they couldn't find any evidence of the man's whereabouts. He had disappeared without a trace. But I knew he was still out there, and I knew he was still watching me. I couldn't escape the feeling that he was always lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. Years went by, and the memories of the terrifying day slowly faded. But I could never forget the man who had tried to kill me. And then one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw him. He was standing outside my bedroom window, his dark hood covering his face just like the first time I saw him. I screamed and ran to my parents' room, but when we went back to my room, there was no one there. My parents brushed it off as a nightmare, but I knew the truth. The man was still out there, watching and waiting. From that day on, I never felt safe in my own house. I always had the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. And even though he was never caught, I knew that he could always be a part of me, a constant reminder of the horror that I had endured.